When you think about dreaming also, it's an interesting concept because to your point about language, can you really dream before you have language? Or in other words, where is this all coming from? So if you want to kind of boil it down, one scientific strategy, I guess, would be to go as early as you can and start studying humans super early and then say, okay, it evolved from something. Is it as simple as that, or is that not at all a path when you study consciousness?
Actually, evolution is an important piece of it. It's interesting you asked me that. So you don't mind, let me just take a step back and actually define a couple of axes, because I think that might help this process a bit. So there is a Belgian neuroscientist. He's actually a neurologist. He studies coma. His name is Stephen Lories, and he came up with this idea that rather than just looking at consciousness as a unidimensional thing, let's look at it on at least two axes. So let's put a y-axis, and that y-axis basically has all the things that we hold within the content of our consciousness, everything that we are aware of, the math problem we're doing, our to-do list, whatever we're holding conscious awareness. And then on the x-axis, we have what you could call level of consciousness. Now, this is what we all seem to intuit and agree on, which is, for instance, if you were to get drowsy right now or you were to fall asleep, you'd be less conscious than I was if I were awake and cogitating and aware. And, you know, as we go through different states, let's take general anesthesia, what I do for a living. When I administer general anesthetic, we tell patients that we're going to help you fall asleep. That's not what it is, because if all we did was help you fall asleep, as soon as the surgeon cut into you, you would wake up screaming with a scalpel. No, we put your brain into a much, much deeper gravity well. And then people like Dr. Lories study coma, and that's an even deeper gravity well, way, way down to the origin, which is kind of a form of brain death, right? So let's now take these two axes. So you have the x-axis and the y-axis. And if you look at a very, very high number on both of them, content and level, that's what it is to be awake, aware, communicating what you and I are doing right now. And you can imagine that as you begin to get drowsy and fall asleep, you fall back a little bit on a line, and sort of this diagonal line formed by these two axes. And then as I anesthetize you, you fall back a little further till you get to coma, which is pretty close to that origin point. But then there are exceptions, and this will help to amplify some of the questions you asked, like dreaming. Dreaming is a state where the level of consciousness is very low, but the content is really high, right? In fact, if you were to image a brain that is dreaming, it looks very much like an awake brain. Parts of the brain are very, very electrically active and excited. And there are also people who have normal sleep-wake cycles, but they've had trauma or injury to the brain. We say they're in a minimally conscious state. And their level of consciousness can be very high when they're awake. There's almost no content there, right? So there are things that deviate off these axes, and I've often wondered what meditation is and where it falls on this system. And, you know, whether there's a third axis and almost like an operating system axis.
That's fascinating. I wanted to understand, because I had, I guess, simplistically thought of awareness as a continuum, right? Where you're like less aware to more aware, but you're saying, and in that I was going to ask you, you know, about heightened states of awareness, because that's also a massive thing that, you know, the future holds, perhaps, where we can not just, you know, put anesthesia so we can operate on people, but I certainly know that there are a lot of people who wish that they could achieve sustained heightened awareness beyond caffeine, right? So to be able to do great feats. But even caffeine, I'm assuming, which we can get to, like that is a true stimulant that really does alter many things about our experience. I mean, certainly it is fairly powerful in and of itself, and ancient, you know, at that. So, but tell me about awareness. How does awareness work? Is it degrees, or is it, I think like you said, different directions? So
let's put it this way. This is such this was, when this went off for me, it was like a eureka moment. Let's look at that first, that x-axis again. That's the level of consciousness. And toggling that axis means that whatever neural network you're looking at, it can be awake, it can be asleep, It can be anesthetized. It turns out we can also, because we're going to bring in animals and plants into this now. We can anesthetize animals and with the same anesthetics that work on us. And in fact, we can not only just anesthetize mammals and vertebrates, we can anesthetize invertebrates, things like fruit flies. And it turns out that fruit flies have an analog gene that causes the equivalent of human narcolepsy in them. And humans who have narcolepsy show this very interesting feature under anesthesia. They go down just like anybody else, but when you wash the anesthetic out of their brain, it takes much longer for their brains to stitch back together. And in fact, if you give them the kind of drugs that would wake them up normally from a narcoleptic episode, that will take them out of general anesthesia. It turns out fruit flies have that analog gene. If the fruit fly has it, they express the exact same behavior, that phenotype under our general anesthetics. And that's very interesting because what it means is that level of consciousness is conserved through the entire animal kingdom, through evolution. And in fact, there is now some evidence that you can apply anesthetics to plants, at least plants that have motor movements, and anesthetize them. However, that other axis you keep asking me about, awareness, directing your attentional spotlight, that content axis, I believe that particular axis is modified by evolution. It's the part of, to use some other terms, it's not phylogenetically conserved. That thing has been free to evolve. So one axis stays kind of conserved in evolution, and the other one has been free to evolve. And that's where I think we are.
Wow, it's super interesting. You made me think of an interview I did a month ago on vertical farming, and the gentleman there was pointing out that the plants, the greens that they were growing, manipulating various factors, still seem to, at a fundamental level, realize that it's not summer, if it is indeed winter. So, it seems like the plant kingdom, for one, seems to have some sort of cycle that it is aware of, even though it is being manipulated from all outer degrees, with temperature and light and maybe nutrition, to think that the cycle, and indeed, they do have, I think he has 14 seasons, 14 harvests with these plants, which is unusual. So you are able to manipulate, but there still are some cycles that are not. It was just interesting.
Well, it's as if the farmer is like trying to control the inputs and trying to tell the plant, okay, look, this is what you imagine what's going to happen.
This is what you're going to do.
What happens when we take our plants into space? What are they going to do? Because that's in fact one of the those are some of the earliest biology experiments we have ever done on orbit, station, and we're planning on those experiments for the moon now, as we're looking to expand to the moon. How are plants going to deal with the cues that they are receiving, just like human brains are altered in both microgravity and radiation environments? What are they going to do? Another interesting thing that this brings up is whether plants on this planet are conscious, but the problem with us as humans is we're using the same instrument to measure and understand the object of what we're measuring, right? So
that kind of calls the whole nature of science into question somewhat, right? Because we're actually measuring the system we are claiming we are objective to. That's always been kind of the...
So you've got two processes. One, you've got a possible like a Heisenberg uncertainty kind of process going on. So the object that is being measured is being changed by the device or the instrument that's doing the measurement. But there's a second problem that people don't talk about, and that is it's very possible that consciousness has a very different spatiotemporal framework than our brains can comprehend, because we're constrained by the frequency with which our nerve cells can fire, and these spatial sort of in three dimensions, what we can perceive as an organism. Mountains and ancient trees, there are all kinds of things that go through cycles that are so much larger. And then there are things that are microscopic that, for instance, vibrate, like subatomic particles, at frequencies also that we can't perceive. And so I wonder, like, for instance, these connected networks of root systems or mycelia from mushrooms, do they constitute conscious networks, but at such different spatiotemporal scales that we can't even comprehend that they exist?